Hey, you guys, I got a question for you. What do you have a taste for? This question came into my mind this morning in terms of, do we have a taste for God's truth? Or do we have a taste for a lie? Do we have a taste for God's righteousness? Or do we just have a taste for what feels right? Especially like on a Friday night or a weekend, you can just say to yourself, what do I have a taste for? Do I want some pizza? Do I want some Chick-fil-A? Do I want some Chipotle? What do I have a taste for? So in the same way, the question is, do we have a taste for God's truth? A couple of months ago, I ended up experiencing some sinus problems, and I ended up calling one pharmacy, and because I was taking one medicine and then I wanted to also take another nasal spray with it. And she was like, no, you shouldn't do that. It could cause negative side effects. And I was just like, I've done this before. Let me call another one. So then I called another pharmacist, and she was like, oh yeah, sure. You can take the allergy pills plus the nasal spray. Y'all, I took that daggone nasal spray and my nose was running like a track star. And what that taught me is that, see, I was seeking after what I wanted to hear. And I had to deal with the consequences. Versus if I just would have listened to the first pharmacist who told me, nope, you shouldn't mix those two things. And literally, my cold got worse because of my disobedience, because of me seeking after what I wanted to hear. And I ended up seeing this verse in 2 Timothy, and I just want to share a couple of Bible verses with you guys. So in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3, it says, for the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. And you guys, I was guilty of this. I literally said, okay, first pharmacist didn't say what I wanted to hear. Let me keep on calling. And so in that sense, I didn't have a taste for the truth. I had a taste for what I wanted to hear. And that can happen to us, but we need to develop a taste for God's truth, whether we want to hear it or not. See, in John, it speaks about God's truth. In John 14, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the way. We need to have a taste for Jesus, an appetite for Jesus. Also in John, this is John 8, starting at verse 31. It says, to the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. See, there's benefits in having a taste for the truth. There's freedom that comes with having a taste for God's truth, instead of having a taste for the lies. See, later in that same chapter, it talks about Satan and how it says when he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. See, sometimes we just want to hear what sounds good to us, what maybe doesn't push us. But see, what we really need to do is have a taste for God's truth. In Matthew, it says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. So as we're thinking about this concept of tasting, that we want to have a hunger and thirst for God's righteousness, for then that's when we should be filled. I found this great article And it was just talking about how a lot of times we seek after things, but it doesn't fulfill us very long. But in other words, when we hunger and thirst for righteousness, and that involves doing what's right, living right under God's morals and standards, then we will have that lasting fulfillment. It also talked about how you are what you eat, not just physically, but spiritually. So what are we eating? What are we consuming? And see, that's based on what we have a taste for. So if we have a taste for God's truth, we're consuming his word. What do we have a taste for? Or are we just listening for what sounds good, listening for what doesn't push us? No, I want God's truth. Push me, Lord. Correct me, Lord. Set me on the right path. God's truth won't lead you astray. And the same thing can even go along like with friends, that you typically want to be around people who say yeah to everything, you know? Hey, is this okay, dude? Yeah. Is this okay to be in this? Yeah. But you need somebody in your life who's going to speak to you in a truthful way. They're going to speak to you in love, but it's going to be the truth. And we want to have a taste for the truth because the truth is what is going to set us free. And even in that part, it just talked about Jesus, even in John, it talked about Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. And we want to be free. We want to be free. So we got to think about, we are what we eat. We are what we consume. And so that's why I just encourage you guys to taste and see that the Lord is good. And this came from Psalm chapter 34, verse 8. But later in that chapter, it says, the righteous cry out and the Lord hears them and he delivers them from their troubles. So see, we want to live right. We need to live right. Because when we cry out to God, he hears us. He turns his ear to our cry and he delivers us. But if we don't have a taste for righteousness and living right, and we just have a taste for living to what feels right, then that's causing a different result. And the last thing that they had mentioned, another Bible verse that they had mentioned, came from 1 Peter chapter 2. And it says, like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. So even as we think about this concept of tasting and your hunger and your thirst, let's include craving. What are you craving? What do you have an appetite for? And then in my study Bible, it says these things. It says Christians require proper spiritual nourishment if they are to grow in spiritual maturity. This nourishment is to be sought with the same intense eagerness exhibited in very young infants who yearn for feeding. Spiritual milk is pure when it is unmixed, not contaminated with evil such as malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. And see, even in that part, pure milk, not mixed. See, the enemy tries to be cunning and sly and crafty. And so what he does is tries to mix in, just a little bit of evil with good. And so where you might not be able to taste the difference. But I pray that our taste buds are able to taste the artificial. Just like a while back, I used to love Chick-fil-A's mac and cheese. And it was like the more and more I got it, it was just like something just don't taste good. Something's just not real. Something's just, they must be using some artificial something. And I don't get their mac and cheese anymore. My appetite changed. I want God's pure spiritual milk. I don't want the enemy's milk that's mixed and contaminated with lies. I have a taste for God's truth. That's what we want. So it is my prayer that we all hunger and thirst for righteousness. Because this is a daily desire. Give us this day our daily bread. That we hunger and thirst for righteousness. That we have a taste for God's truth. That we have a taste for righteousness. That we crave his spiritual milk. We don't want to be deceived. We want to live a life that is pleasing to God's eyesight. So I just pray and ask God to change and shift our appetite so that we have a desire for him and him alone. Be blessed.